Hey, it's Amalia and welcome back to the Horsemanship Breakthroughs podcast. I'm really excited today because we're going to be speaking all about bitless riding, how to ride your horse bitless, everything bitless bridles, bitless riding, and bitless tips. I love riding bitless, but I'm not anti-bits. I still ride my horses with bits, although I do have one horse who generally prefers bitless and the other horse she's pretty happy in either. I'm not the sort of person who's like extreme viewed in terms of like we should all be riding bitless and abolish all bits for life. Although I have to say my opinion is subject to change because who knows, maybe one day in the future that will be my belief. And you may have noticed different people that I have interviewed on the podcast. Some prefer to ride bitless, some have tried riding bitless and think that bits are still the way to go. I think the jury is still out, and I think it's sort of like, saddles. It's very much a personal opinion and very much a personal preference. However, no matter what you ride in, obviously we need to be considering how the horse feels, how the horse is responding, and using whatever tool we have in the lightest way possible, which requires really good training and really good timing of release and really considering the horse's experience. It's really interesting though, because when I talk to non-horsey people, like bits is such a traditional thing, as in they've been used for thousands and thousands of years and people just accept that that's how we ride horses. They have a bit in their mouth. But if you think about other species, like imagine us putting a bit in a dog's mouth, say, like it seems like such a barbaric thing to do. And then when I speak to non-horsey people, they're like, oh, so it's actually like a metal object in the horse's mouth. Like, wow, that sounds really kind of harsh. And it does, like, without any sort of education around it, it does sound a bit bizarre and a bit cruel. But we know that horses are fairly accepting of bits when they are ridden in a kind way. But anyway, today's all about bitless riding, so don't get me on the tangent of talking about bits. Maybe that's for another episode. But basically, I recently rode in a Karen Rolfe clinic in South Australia, which was an incredible experience. But I rode 50-50 in bitless and with a bit with the horse I was riding, and I had a lot of questions about the type of bridle I was wearing and bitless riding in general. So I thought, why not do a podcast episode all about bitless riding? And then I put it out to my Instagram followers. I asked you what you would like to hear me talk about in this episode, and I got a lot of questions. So I'm going to cover all of those today in today's podcast episode. So some of those questions were, I'll just read them out to you. We've got riding with confidence, going bitless, jumping bitless, how to get your horse used to it, aids, etc. Are there any particular bitless bridles that you would recommend over others? Different bridles for different disciplines, e.g. dressage versus show jumping. Any issues with skin rubbing or irritation to look out for with different styles of bridles. The transition tips for bitless for when to leave the arena for trails or going outside the barn. I'd love to see you talk the rules surrounding bitless, how it's not allowed in dressage, etc. Bitless and competing. Where did you get your bridle? How do you start using a bitless bridle? What is the process? Where do I start? Recommended first starting out bitless bridle. So lots of different questions, which I'm really excited to answer. It makes it a lot more fun for me answering questions on a podcast because it feels more interactive. Like for you, if you've listened to the Horsemanship Breakthroughs podcast for a long time, you're probably familiar with me and some of my principles and my values in training horses, but I don't know much about you and it feels sometimes like a one-sided conversation. So I love hearing from you and your questions. So if you ever feel like it, definitely get in touch with me on Instagram at Amalia_horses. I'm always looking for inspiration for more podcast episodes. So do reach out. I am a real human. I read all the messages. So please, I'd love to hear from you. Before we actually jump into everything bitless riding, I am really excited because Horsemanship Fundamentals Academy, also known as HFA, is opening up for enrolment on October 18th, 2023, which is about 1 week from now if you're listening to this episode as soon as it drops. It is for you. So HFA is for you if you want to follow a proven, flexible framework of groundwork and riding to help build the essential foundation of connection, confidence, and communication with your horse. Imagine that your horse trusts you, you can communicate clearly with each other, you're both much more relaxed even in new situations, your horse is willing to do what you ask, and you have the skills and techniques for when problems do arise. And these things can allow you to do awesome things like ride bitless, go to competitions, have a relaxing trail ride, and simply enjoy your horses more without all the extra stress and frustration. Recently at the Karen Rolfe Clinic, people were complimenting me on the awesome connection that I have with my horse. And honestly, it just comes down to good fundamentals. Like, there's no secret sauce or magic to it. I mean, it feels magical, but it really does come down to 3 simple fundamentals of connection, confidence, and communication. Plus, the advanced things are just the fundamentals done to a high level. So you may as well get the fundamentals good no matter what your discipline or goal is with horses. Now, this will be the last time that HFA is offered at the current price. And we will be doing 6 live coaching calls with me over 12 weeks so you can have the maximum support on your horsemanship journey. We did a live round earlier in the year and it was so good connecting with people over Zoom. Like I was saying before, sometimes it feels like a bit of a one-sided conversation, but when you're in my HFA family, or HFA fam as we call it, I get to connect with you more. I get to talk with you about your horses, what you're struggling with, what your wins are, and help guide you towards how you can make more progress and what the next steps are for you. Of course, everything is laid out for you within the HFA platform, but inevitably you're going to have extra questions that are specifically related to your horse, and I just love helping you troubleshoot those moments. So it's really nice to connect with you all over Zoom. Plus, you don't just get access to me when you join HFA, we welcome you into our exclusive community with like-minded horse people who are all on the same journey and are happy to celebrate your wins and help you move through the challenges. That's the HFA fam that I was talking about. And even some of the other members have been referring to our community as HFA fam, which is really nice. I don't know, it's just, you know, the horse world, sometimes it can be really cliquey and you feel like you don't belong anywhere. I've certainly felt like that, especially the more alternative approaches that I am taking in my horsemanship. I just feel like I'm no longer that kind of mainstream horse girl that, you know, that goes to competitions and that sort of thing. I don't really fit into a box. But if you are vibing with these podcast episodes and you really relate to a lot of the content and you feel like that this is more the direction you want to take in your horsemanship, then we will welcome you with open arms into our HFA fam. Someone once described HFA as the gateway drug to horsemanship, and it's true. And many of my students have gone on to even bigger and better things, and I couldn't be more proud of them. You know who you are. And yeah, so the gateway drug to horsemanship. It's basically like once you get a taste of this, you can't go back. Once I open your eyes in HFA, you can't close them again. You will be elevated to a new level of horsemanship, and let me tell you, it is addictive. I think back to when I first got into horsemanship, and personally, I would have loved to have more examples of people doing horsemanship in a way that I wanted to. Like, absolutely nothing against Western or cowboys or cowgirls. Like, I think you're incredible. But where are all the English riders at doing horsemanship, right? Like, when I started, I just didn't have a huge amount of examples of that. And so for me, it felt like I had to completely change, you know, my uniform or the breed of horse that I liked to get involved in horsemanship. I mean, looking back, of course, I can think that's a little silly, but you don't have to wear a certain uniform to do horsemanship. Good horsemanship is good horsemanship, but it's nice to have role models doing it in a way that inspires you. So HFA, whilst we do have some people that use different equipment and have different styles, we all have our own style. I think it's nice to connect with others who do also come from a more traditional English riding type background. So if you're inspired by people riding bridleless, doing liberty, or simply just riding in harmony with their horse, it all starts with the fundamentals. And I would love to have you in Horsemanship Fundamentals Academy, where I teach you exactly how to get those fundamentals. To find out more, join the HFA waitlist so you can be the first to know and have access to an early bird exclusive offer when enrolment opens in October. So it'll be October 18th that HFA opens, and it will only be the people on the waitlist that get access to an exclusive offer that'll only be available for a short time. So you must be on the waitlist to get access to that. And to do that, you just need to go to amaliadempsey.com and then click on Academy. There'll also be a link in the show notes, and then it will prompt you to join the waitlist. Or you can also go to amaliadempsey.com/HFA waitlist and enter your details there. The early birds who join HFA when I open enrollment on the 18th get the absolute best deal. So if you're wanting to have access to that and get that offer, then jump on the waitlist. I'm so excited to be welcoming the new HFA members this month. I love hearing about you and your horses and seeing your transformations and wins as you progress through HFA. I'd love for you to join us. So again, just go to amaliadempsey.com and click on Academy and join the waitlist, and then keep an eye out for emails that will be coming your way on the 18th of October about how to join and what the deal is and all the details. So super excited about that. Okay, now let's dive into everything Bitless.
Welcome to the Horsemanship Breakthroughs podcast, a source for riding and training insights with the goal of helping your horse be a light, happy, and willing partner. I'm your host, Amalia Dempsey, a mainstream equestrian rider who discovered natural horsemanship and equine learning theory, and now I help riders like you achieve connection and communication with your horse so you can have more fun and fulfillment whilst prioritizing the partnership. Get more learning resources, including my free connection and communication mini course at amaliadempsey.com. Click the follow button so you don't miss an episode, and if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave me a rating and review or screenshot this episode and share on social media. I hope you enjoy the show.
Okay, let's first start off by talking about why Bitless. I think a lot of people would have that question initially. I know it's something that I would have thought back in the day. The only time I ever would ride Bitless was, I remember competing, and sometimes in the evenings we would walk our horses, and this is back in the day where there were less safety regulations. Sometimes we'd be too lazy to walk our horses around, so we would just jump on them bareback with a halter on. And I would just ride Bitless then, but that was more out of convenience and just being lazy really, rather than wanting to ride Bitless. I would say that I only really thought about riding Bitless when I just wanted to quickly hop on and ride from the paddock to where I was tacking up, etc. I suppose I always rode in a bit because that's what was required for competition. That's what everyone else did, and I never really questioned the status quo. But then as I got older, I was inspired by people riding Bitless. I was searching for a lighter way to ride my horses, and I had even seen people riding completely bridleless, which blew my mind, and I just thought, wow, I would love to be able to do that. And of course, one of the bridging steps to being able to ride completely bridleless, so with the neck rope, would be, can you ride Bitless first? So I love that people are asking the question, how can I ride Bitless and why Bitless? It is an incredible feeling to be able to ride with much lighter cues. Think about, maybe you yourself have experienced riding a horse who is what we would call strong in the mouth or hard in the mouth, and you just think it would be impossible to ride this Bitless. But let me tell you that inside every strong or hard-mouthed horse is a soft, light horse. It all comes down to training. Every horse has a sensitive mouth, in my opinion. It's just a matter of helping that horse to understand the cues. No horse wants to have heavy pressure on the bit. That is uncomfortable. No one can argue that that's uncomfortable. That's not uncomfortable, because it surely is. Put a metal bit in your mouth and have a 60 plus kilo person pull on it. it's going to be uncomfortable. So the goal is always lightness, no matter what equipment you use, but riding bitless requires an extra level of lightness because you don't have that. It's not as motivating, I guess you could say. It's not as aversive using pressure on the nose to motivate a response. So it means that your horse must have crystal clear clarity around what it is that you're asking. And I'll explain how to achieve that a little bit later in the episode. You also need to have a level of trust and communication between you and your horse before you think about bitless riding, whether you're starting your horse bitless or whether you are transitioning from bit to bitless, because without that trust and connection, it's going to be a lot more kind of scary for both of you because you don't have this mutual understanding, which is, in my opinion, like a prerequisite to even riding your horse, no matter what the equipment, really. But if you don't have that trust and connection, I would recommend definitely working on that first, on the ground, through groundwork, before you even think about riding in general. Okay, so where to start? I've kind of already touched on that. Where to start? What is the process? How do you introduce bitless riding? So yeah, as I was saying, first, if your horse is not relaxed or responsive on the ground, I wouldn't even think about riding in general with a bit or bitless. You must have the fundamentals down before you think about riding. I mean, with any equipment, but especially bitless, because you don't really have the end say, because a horse can very easily push through bitless pressure because it's not as aversive as pressure with the bit. If you don't have the fundamentals, I know I sound like a broken record. Please join me in HFA. It's opening soon. But I'm clearly very passionate about the fundamentals. I believe every horse and rider must have them, both on the ground and riding, but especially on the ground before riding, because it just sets you up for success no matter what you want to do with your horse. I promise, I'm not going to promise actually. I was going to say, I promise I won't talk about HFA again, but it probably will come up. But anyway, so you must have, where do you start? What is the process? First of all, have really good connection, trust, understanding between you, have really good groundwork, which means that you have clear communication on the ground between you. Your cues work from the ground. Your horse is focused on you, connected with you, understanding what you're asking them to do. Now, my horses were actually started bitless, and I think a lot of good horse trainers do this. They start their horses bitless because a lot of let's say you're doing a lot of the groundwork in a rope halter, and then you ride the horses the first rides in a rope halter. They are already familiar with how to respond to pressures of the rope halter on their heads, versus if you just use completely different equipment when you ride versus on the ground. It's a little bit harder to bridge that gap. And your groundwork really should have a direct translation to riding. We don't just do groundwork for the sake of doing groundwork. Like, there is a purpose. And often a big chunk of that purpose is setting your ride up for success. Now, I understand that not all people had their horses started bitless, or maybe that you're unsure whether your horse was started bitless. So maybe they don't have any history of being ridden bitless, and that's okay, because I'm going to talk about how to transition from riding with a bit to bitless as well. But, in an ideal world, in my opinion, horses will be started bitless and then transition to wearing a bit if that's what you would like to do. Now, something that I talk about with bitless riding is that you don't just want to jump up there and see what happens. You want to set yourself up for success. So think about the types of things that you would want to ask your horse when you're riding and test them out. Train them on the ground first. So you can even set yourself up where you're standing on the ground, kind of like next to the saddle or the riding position, and have your horse in your bitless bridle or your halter. We'll talk more about equipment a little bit later. And you check the different cues. A lot of people perhaps haven't even done this with their bit to see if your horse has a clear understanding. And this is something that I do observe. Perhaps someone's struggling with their horse not understanding their cue to stop, or they sort of push through it. And it's like, okay, well, let's just see what the horse's basic understanding is of when there is pressure applied to the bit. And we might do that on the ground, and the horse, it just gets confused and starts chomping on the bit and doesn't go backwards off of the feel of the pressure. They just sort of push into it. So for me, that's a fundamental issue. That's something we need to address before applying pressure on the bit when riding, let alone bitless. So we must have really light cues on the ground from the reins for going backwards, because we want the horse to be feeling that when there is pressure on the bit, this is a fundamental level, I'm not talking about refined riding with contact, etc., but essentially when there is pressure on the bit, the horse needs to feel like they've got to stop and go backwards. If, they're at the halt and they feel pressure from the bit, we want them to think, okay, I've got to go backwards from that in order for the pressure to be relieved. Also, lateral flexion, because that is essentially the emergency stop, you could say. If you ever needed to quickly stop and get off, using one rein is a really good way of doing that. So I'd want to see that there is a lateral flexion left and right. Again, testing this from the ground first before I ride the horse and see if it works when I'm up there on the back. So you're thinking about rein cues from the ground. What rein cues do I need when I'm up there riding, and can I practice them on the ground first before, just seeing what happens when I get up there? So for me, that's, stopping, backwards, lateral flexion at a bare minimum, but really all the yields. So forequarter yields, hindquarter yields. If this language is foreign to you, these are some of the things that I teach in fundamentals. So I would encourage you to learn those first. You want to have basic body control of your horse on the ground before you test in the saddle, and it's got to be at the halt first, because that's going to be the easiest place to teach them, because there's less criteria, there's less variables, so you can really be clear and specific about exactly what it is that you're teaching your horse. When you are going through these rein cues on the ground, you want to be thinking your horse understands straight away what it is that you're asking. So if let's say you're asking for a backup, so you shorten the reins, apply a little bit of pressure, and the horse takes, 5-10 seconds to think about taking a backward step, then in my opinion, they're not ready to be asked that under saddle. You want it really light and responsive and crystal clear, the horse goes, oh yeah, I know exactly what that means, before you go checking it when you're in the saddle. I hope that makes sense. So once your rein cues are really good on the ground, then you can try it when riding. But it might not be within the same session. You might be working on those rein cues for 3 or 4 sessions or more or less, depending on how well your horse goes, before you hop on and check it out when riding. I think that is one of the biggest mistakes that I see people making, and that I'm not immune to making as well. I often have to catch myself when I'm skipping steps or rushing steps. But it's good. I think it's good that I now have that awareness that I'm doing that. But you don't just go, all right, well, the body cues are roughly there, I'll just hop on and see if they're under saddle, because what you get on the ground is probably, a percentage of what you get under saddle is a percentage of what you've got on the ground. So don't expect it to be better when you're up there riding. You want to get it really good on the ground so it somewhat works under saddle. So just think about breaking these rein cues, this training of rein cues down over multiple sessions, rather than going, okay, I've done that, moving on. It's you want to make sure your horse is crystal clear about the rein cues before you check them when you're riding. Now, let's say you have gone over your rein cues on the ground. You're really happy with how your horse is responding to those cues. When you are riding, you want to be thinking body first, then your tools, okay? And really intention first, then body, then tools. This is something that is really important if you want to ride with lightness and subtle aids and subtle cues, because horses can feel your intention. They can certainly feel your body. And the tools is kind of like a last resort in a way. We would still often have to use our tools because, we're not all perfect riders. But you've already trained your last resort cue or last resort aid on the ground using your basic body control rein cues, so that when you go into the saddle, you can start to teach the horse how they can even avoid rein pressure altogether. And this is a little hint as to how you can eventually ride bridleless, because to do that, your horse really needs to be tuned into your intention and what your body is doing. And you need to have really good body awareness and really aware of what your body is asking your horse. And if you don't have really good body awareness, you need to work on that as a rider. And there's off the horse exercises you can do for that. I've got them in my 8-week program. You can have a look at that if that interests you. But you also need to spend a lot of time really thinking about what exactly your body is asking your horse to do when you're up there riding. Like, I play with little exercises where I think about, okay, can I feel my left seat bone a little bit more on the saddle? And in response to that, I'd like my horse to drift or follow the weight of that, because just thinking about the left seat bone in the saddle a little bit more is going to apply a bit more weight there. And I'd like my horse to follow the direction of my weight. Even turning your head in one direction is going to place a little bit more weight in that direction. So it might not feel like it, but horses are extremely sensitive and they're aware of where your weight is moving in the saddle. Now, we can dull our horses to that, and I think in some situations it's necessary. For example, a beginner rider, if their weight is going to be going all over the place, we don't want the horse to be really sensitive to that, because they will also be going all over the place. But if you're interested in more refined riding, we would like that level of sensitivity in our horses, and therefore we need to resensitize our horses to that level of sophisticated riding. So I got onto that because I was talking about body or intention first, then your body, then your reins. If you take just that from this episode, you could completely change your riding, whether you ride with a bit or bitless. Intention, body, and then your tools or your reins, etc. So that is how you get your horse to respond more so to your body than having to always rely on the reins, which you don't want to be just relying on the reins when you're riding bitless or bridleless. You have to elevate your riding to a more refined way if that is your goal. Now, when you do ride bitless for the first time, you do not have to go cold turkey. Okay, so if you are transitioning a horse from bit to bitless, you can ride with your bridle on and your bitless bridle on at the same time. Now, that could get a little bit clunky depending on what equipment that you're going to use, but I would suggest using a rope halter underneath a very simple bridle with the noseband taken off, so there's not a whole heap of gear on your horse's head. Using clip-on rope reins, because that way you can kind of move between using the bitless and the bit. And another thing you can do is actually ride with 2 reins. So reins connected to the bitless bridle or the halter, and reins connected to the bit. And so what you could do then is when you're up there, you could ask your horse for your basic body control yield. So let's say backwards. You can ask with the bit first, and then your horse moves backwards, you release, you reward, you relax for a little bit, and then you try the exact same yield with the bitless. So that way, it's something you've recently asked your horse, like very recently, so they're more likely to offer that behavior as an answer to your request. And then you can just work through all of your basic body control yields, starting with the bit, getting that light response, and then moving on to the bitless or the rope halter underneath your bridle and getting a light response also. I would not, and I would advise against hopping on your horse bitless and going, right, let's go, walk, trot, canter. You could probably get away with that. Some riders could definitely get away with that, but you don't want to get away with it. You want your horse to have understanding. You want it to feel like a conversation. You want to know that you've checked off all the things that are going to help you ride bitless in a way where you're both understanding each other. So start at the halt. Do all your basic body control yields. Once they're really good at the halt, you can move on to the walk. And again, that might not be within the one session. That might be over a number of sessions. You might also ride in your complete normal way with the bit. And then at the end of the session, you add on that extra set of reins to the halter underneath, and you go through your basic body yields then. Like, you don't have to just go cold turkey. You can pepper it in, and in fact I recommend peppering it in. Otherwise your horse is going to go, whoa, you've completely changed the way we do everything. I'm super confused because this is really foreign to me. Whereas if you're just teaching one little piece at a time, but you're consistent over time, it'll be such a gradual transition to bitless that your horse kind of won't even notice. But they'll surely appreciate it, because I feel like riding bitless is a great experience for both horse and rider. Hopefully that helps answer the question of where to start and how to kind of transition from bit to bitless. I'll just recap that because I feel like I went on many tangents. So in general, make sure that you have good connection and trust, mutual trust between you and your horse before you even think about it. And that starts with your relationship on the ground and good groundwork. Then you want to make sure that you can do basic body control yields from your reins on the ground with light response and clear understanding from the horse. Then you want to make sure that you can apply those same yields when you're riding at the halt, thinking about your intention first, then your body, then your tools, and perhaps you also have a hybrid, so you have your bit and your bitless on at the same time, so it doesn't feel like you're riding completely cold turkey, and you have the option of using the bit if you want to. And then gradually you just phase out the use of the bit. And you gradually, over time, you progress from the halt to the walk to the trot, etc. Okay, I hope that gives you a little bit more clarity. Of course, it's always difficult to speak about these things sometimes on the podcast because I've got a picture in my head of exactly how to do this, but explaining it in words can sometimes be tricky without a visual. If you would like a visual, Module 8 in HFA, I go through these basic body control yields. And I actually do demonstrate this on a horse where the halter is underneath the bridle. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head if I'm riding bitless or with the reins attached to the bit, but the principles are the same. You can you'll see how I set up how I train those basic body control yields, and I explain them in great detail. So if you're like, I actually don't even know how to do those yields, then HFA is a fantastic place to start for that. Okay, the next question is when to transition from leaving the arena to going on trails, etc. Again, I would not go cold turkey and go, okay, I want to ride bitless. Let's go on a forest ride and just see what happens. And I'm sure the person asking this question would not do that. But I certainly recommend, as I've said, peppering it in over time, making sure that you're both really confident in the arena, or perhaps even, I would do it in an arena first, but some people might prefer to start in a round yard where it's an even smaller space so that there's less chance that your horse, or it feels like there's less chance your horse is kind of going to just take over and you won't have any sort of control. So you could start in a round yard, and then when all of your basic body control yields at the halt are really good and you can walk, trot, and even canter, where it feels like your horse isn't wanting to race away from you, but equally isn't just wanting to stop all the time either. That's when I would say you're ready to go out in a more open space like a larger arena or even a small paddock, say. And in an ideal world, you would have your round yard, then you'd progress to an arena, and then you would progress to like small paddock and then a large paddock, and then perhaps do the same in a new environment, a new location, and then you can think about going in the big wide open world like a forest ride or the beach or something like that. But that's a lot of steps, and not everyone has the luxury of those different facilities. I totally get that. But I would say it's definitely about a feeling that you have. If you feel like you're going, ooh, I want to ride in the open paddock, but I'm not sure. Well, if you're not sure, then you're probably not ready. And you want to have steps in place. Like, you need to ask yourself, okay, what would make me feel ready? Okay, I need to know that I can stop my horse at any time. I need to know I can back my horse up at any time. I need to know I can kind of like control a situation that might get out of hand. Like, can I quickly laterally flex my horse and hop off if I need to? Like a one rein stop and emergency dismount, say. I need to know that I can canter comfortably, because what if my horse does just canter and I'm not comfortable with that? So if you're feeling like, oh, I want to be able to ride out in the big paddock or on a trail ride, but I'm not sure, well, write down the things that would make you more sure and test those things out in a smaller space first and get them really good in a smaller space first so you know that they're going to work. The beauty of using positive reinforcement as well, so personally I use combined reinforcement. If you don't know much about reinforcement, I have spoken about it on other episodes. I do go into detail in it in HFA as well, or you could just Google like different operant conditioning and different reinforcement methods, but I use negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement, and those things are described in the mathematical sense. So removal reinforcement and adding reinforcement, you could also say. So basically removing pressure to motivate a response, or adding something desirable to motivate a response. And the beauty of using positive reinforcement, so in a nutshell, negative reinforcement is pretty much pressure release. Positive reinforcement is pretty much using food rewards. That's really simplifying it. There's much more to it, but in general, I use combined. So I use both. I use pressure release and reward. And the beauty of using positive reinforcement or reward with your riding is that stopping is a highly reinforced behavior, because you got to stop to give your horse the food, right? You can't really give your horse the food in motion. So the horse knows that not every time, depending on where you're at with the training, but a lot of the time when you stop, there is a reward for it. So your horse is seeking that stop. So if you're someone who is interested in using positive reinforcement when you're riding, it really helps with the bitless riding, because your horse is often thinking about when is the next stopping point. So it's nice knowing that your horse is looking for that, because if you're a bit more of a conservative rider, let's say, it's nice knowing that your horse is looking for the stop rather than always looking for the go or trying to run away from you. That's certainly not a nice feeling if you're riding bitless or riding with a bit even. That's how, people run into describing their horse as strong or hard mouth, because the horse is just trying to run away and is pushing through the pressure of the bit because it doesn't understand or it's afraid. So there was this one time where I was actually going for a forest ride with a friend, a new-ish friend and a fairly mainstream rider as well, right? And I was riding bitless. This story just came to me because of the question about leaving to go on trails. And I've ridden this horse bitless a lot, right? So she was really light and she was familiar with being ridden bitless, but I let my horses graze a bit on trail rides. And we hadn't mounted up yet and was just letting her graze. And I was distracted and talking to my friend, and my horse stepped on the rein and pulled back and broke the bitless bridle. So my horse was standing there in the forest with a broken bitless bridle, and I was just like, oh, I have no quote unquote control over my horse's head now. So I literally just looped the lead rope around the horse's neck and we walked back to the float so I could put another halter or bridle on. But it made me go, wow, like a lot of horses in this situation, you would have no chance of leading that horse back to the float. But I could lead my horse back to the float with a lead rope around its neck only, because I had developed that level of communication. I wasn't relying on my tools for control as such. I mean, sure, the rope was still around the neck, but I didn't have to have a bit in the horse's mouth or even something around their nose to encourage them to stay with me so that I could get back to the float. So that's the sort of lightness that I always want to have with my horses. I don't want to always be relying on heavy equipment to control the situation. Ultimately, I just want my horses to want to be with me, regardless of what's on them. I mean, you could take that the wrong way. I mean, I'm not expecting my horses to always follow me at liberty, no matter what the situation. Like, that's just unrealistic, and who knows? I mean, maybe there's some amazing horseman out there that has achieved that. I'm certainly not at that level, but I would like some mutual understanding, like, please stay with me when we're together. There was also a time that I rode completely bridleless on an old golf course with a friend. That was cool. That was fun. It's always a gamble when you ride bridleless, okay? So there is somewhat of an illusion that you have total control when you're riding bridleless. You don't. You really have to have a level of connection and communication between you and your horse that if you don't, it's not, you know, things can go south pretty quickly. But you make calculated decisions. I didn't start the ride bridleless. I had my neck rope with me. I was riding bitless, and I was testing things out all the way along the ride. Like, do I have basic body control without using my reins? Like, still with the option of using the bitless there, but I was riding bridleless with a bitless bridle on, okay? And that's actually a really key thing to think about. So you can ride bridleless just with your horse wearing a bitless bridle. So it's like, okay, I'm going to put my head, my mind mentally into this bridleless riding state and pretend that the bitless bridle isn't on. Now I'm talking about riding bridleless, but I'll get back to bitless in a sec. And you can kind of test your communication without going completely bridleless. It's the same with bitless, okay? So you can have your reins attached to the bit and a set of reins attached to the halter underneath the bridle, and you can go, okay, I'm going to pretend now that I'm completely bitless and just ride bitless, knowing that you have the option of riding with the bit if you need. Like, the reins are there if you need. And the little Velcro things on your saddle pads are really handy for that, because you can kind of attach one set of reins to the Velcro, and then it's like a quick release as well if it gets caught in anything. But that way you can sort of forget about those bit reins for a little while and just focus on using your bitless reins. So you're testing the waters again before going cold turkey. As you have probably figured out, I'm not a fan of just going cold turkey and just taking a gamble and seeing what happens. Test things out before you take the bit off. Test things out before you take the bridle off completely. So hopefully that helps answer the question of when to transition from leaving the arena to going on trails. Like, you just want to make sure that your communication is really good and you know it's going to work. You're not taking a gamble, as you're not taking a huge gamble. So yeah, start small, gradually go big, make sure your communication is really clear, and don't go cold turkey. Now, someone had asked for me to touch on rules for competition in regards to bitless. So at the moment, I don't really compete too much, but I do like going to little riding club rallies and things like that, and they will actually let me ride bitless, which is really nice. I feel very happy and lucky that I'm allowed to ride bitless in a public location, because I know that not all organisations are facilitating or accommodating for alternative kind of riding or alternative equipment. So that is really nice that they allow me to do that. But you could always ask, if you go to a riding club or something similar, just ask the committee, is it okay if I ride bitless? And usually the answer is, as long as you have, well, the answer that I've had is, if you have good control of your horse, then you can ride bitless. But you need to consider, like, a lot of people get angry at organisations for not allowing bitless, but they have a duty of care, they have insurance, so they might not always be allowed to allow their riders to ride bitless, and it's not always the fact that they're just completely anti-alternative methods. So yeah, try not to, if they say no, it's not the end of the world. Hopefully you have a horse who you can ride both ways, with a bit and bitless. Or if you only ride bitless, perhaps ask in advance if there is somewhere, if they do allow you to ride bitless. Now, in terms of competing, what disciplines do allow bitless riding? So I don't know all of the rules in different countries, etc., but I know that currently at competitions in Australia, you're not able to ride bitless in dressage. You must ride with a bit, and you must ride with a noseband. So you can't really even ride with a bridle with just a bit and no noseband, which I like to do sometimes, or most of the time. You have to wear a noseband, and you have to ride in a bit. Now, who knows if these rules will change? I think they will. I certainly think they will within my lifetime. I think that bitless will be allowed for sure. It is a bit strange to me that you're not allowed to ride bitless, because if the goal is lightness and understanding from the horse, you would think that bitless would be allowed because it is a lighter level of communication. However, dressage is about refined riding, so perhaps there's arguments that with a bit you can be more refined. I think it's very much about tradition as well. In dressage, traditionally, they've used bits, they've used double bridles, so there is that component as well. A lot of dressage is about tradition. Think about even the uniforms that they wear. So yeah, but I do think it is changing, and it will change. I know that in show jumping and cross country, you actually can ride bitless, which, go figure, that's probably more likely where you're going to be in a situation where you can be out of control, so to speak. But they do allow it, as far as I know. So yeah, it's just the dressage component of eventing and dressage in general that I think you have to wear a bit. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly sure that you're allowed to ride bitless in show jumping and cross country. However, do you really ever see it? I don't think we really see it much here in Australia. Perhaps like hackamores that are a form of bitless riding, I guess. But yeah, I know that it's not. In dressage, pretty much the answer is no, we don't allow bitless riding, and that's pretty much globally. But in saying that, it is going to change. I think it will change anyway. I think, sometimes people really want me to, bag on organisations about not allowing bitless, but I think there's a lot more to it. I don't think anyone's sitting there going, we hate bitless riders. I just think it takes a lot to have things changed and to have rules changed and tradition change. But it also doesn't really concern me too much personally, because I'm not competing. But I do think in general, maybe I'm biased because of who I surround myself with, I do think that we are moving in a better direction in terms of allowing more alternative equipment and calling out equipment that perhaps isn't the most horse friendly. So my goal is that bitless riding is allowed in competition no matter what discipline in the future, but I don't really think at this stage bits will be banned or should be banned. But as always, I think horse welfare has to be number one and closely monitored in especially a competition or a public setting where we should be demonstrating good horsemanship. Okay, now let's talk about probably the most commonly asked question, and that is what bitless bridle do I recommend? What's my favorite bitless bridle? What to look for in a bitless bridle? How to fit it? how to choose it, what to use when first starting out, all of the above. I get asked this a lot actually, and I do remember when I was first considering bitless bridles that weren't rope halters, I was a bit confused myself, because there's a lot out there, and it's like, what even is the mechanism of a bitless bridle? When you're so used to riding with a bit, you're like, how does it even work? But it's really not that complicated. I'll go over that in a second. But in general, as I've said, to start off with, the best bitless bridle to use when you're starting out is whatever you're using on the ground in your groundwork. So whether that's a webbed halter, a rope halter, a cavesson, like a traditional cavesson style that people use in like more classical in-hand work. Whatever you are choosing to use on the ground, use that as your first bitless bridle when you're starting out. So for me, that's a rope halter, a simple rope halter, because it's not a new feeling for your horse. You're not surprising your horse with a completely new piece of equipment when you're riding bitless. It's a smooth transition. There's less variables, there's less change, so your horse is more likely to feel comfortable and respond to your cues, because it's the only difference is now you're up on their back. Okay, so for the best bridle, bitless bridle to start when first starting out riding bitless is whatever you are using on the ground. And then what bitless bridle do you choose when you're looking to ride in a more refined way, like perhaps with contact, or, you're past the point of just using your rope halter or your webbed halter and you want something that looks a little nicer and a little fancier. So my personal preference is one that I actually had designed myself. I was a bit fed up. I couldn't find a bitless bridle that I absolutely loved, and I'm like really pedantic and really fussy and particular with my gear. I wish I wasn't, but I just am. So I was like, I'm just going to get one made, and I will get like 50 made. And then, because usually you can't just get one made for yourself. If you go through a manufacturer, you have to have a bulk amount made, and then that way I'll have my own bridle, and I can answer everyone asks me, what bitless bridle do you use, so I can tell them this one and they can buy it. But logistically, it's not an avenue that I want to continue going down as a business, because I just have too many business ideas. So I'm not going to do that for now. But who knows, I might again in the future, because it's honestly a request I get all the time. And I do absolutely love the bitless bridle that I designed myself, because it looks beautiful for a start. It looks like a normal bridle. I wanted a bitless bridle that looked normal. I didn't want to stand out in terms of like something weird looking on my horse's head. I think I've just been conditioned to look at normal bridles on a horse, and to me that it looks nice. So I wanted something that sort of looked like a normal English bridle. So it has a beautiful anatomical headpiece. It has a curved brow band, which I think looks really attractive on horse. It has a nice padded noseband. It's a simple cavesson noseband, so it's not a crank, because I think that goes against the whole idea of riding bitless. We don't want to crank that noseband up real tight. It's got to be still loose, in my opinion, so there can be an on-off type feel when you are going through those basic body control yields. I wanted something that was padded, because when you ride with contact, you don't want it to be an uncomfortable feel on the horse's nose. You want it to be something that they can easily sort of accept on their nose, and it not feel like they always want to escape away from that. And I wanted some reinforcing around the rings in the noseband. So if you look at a lot of bitless nosebands and the rings where the reins actually attach onto the rings, they're not actually reinforced that solidly in a lot of them. Like, they're not very well made in terms of how well those rings are attached to the noseband. And not that I want to be pulling on those reins real hard, but I want to know that in the event that I might need to, that those rings aren't just going to like pull off the noseband, right? So in my bitless bridle, they're like reinforced, so there's an extra set of stitching and leather around the ring that it's embedded in that noseband. It is not coming out, okay? So that just gives me a little bit more peace of mind. So when you are shopping around for bitless nosebands, do have a look at exactly where the reins attach on, because it has to be well made and not look like it could easily come out with a good pull. In terms of the mechanism of the bitless bridle, so personally I like what is called a side pull bitless bridle. I know that sounds awful, right? Side pull, like as in we're just pulling on the side. But essentially that is the mechanism. So it's literally just like a halter, a webbed halter, and the reins attached to the side. It's just a little bit more, it looks a little nicer when it looks like a bitless, when it looks like an actual bridle. But it doesn't have a fancy sort of there's some bitless bridles that have like a cross under mechanism where it like applies pressure to underneath the jaw or underneath the chin or around the lips. I just wanted to keep it real simple. And I just didn't think the cross under mechanism was going to be, it just didn't make sense to me. If you have a look at I think they're called a cross under mechanism for a bitless bridle. As you can see, my knowledge in those bridles is not as much as the side pull bitless bridles. But I think this is also something that you need to experiment with. Like I feel like everyone wants to know, what's the perfect bridle? What's the perfect saddle? But something that I've learned is you got to do your own experimentation. Like you've got to try these things yourself to see what you like, what your horse likes. I can tell you what has worked for me, but you might have a different preference. But anyway, I do like the side pull style bridles, which pretty much work as a simple halter, but it looks like a bridle. There are some with different rings as well, so you can, there's a slight like leverage type mechanism to the bridle. Again, I just like the simplicity of a side pull. It's I like simplicity in a lot of the gear that I use. I call it equestrian minimalism. I want to do another podcast episode on that, but I just like using simple stuff. As soon as things get too complicated, too technical, I'm just like, nah, I don't want to be involved. I just like the simplicity. Of course, if a horse absolutely needs something that's complicated, I'll go down that pathway, but I just really like a simple side pull bitless bridle. Now, you can't buy my bitless bridle anymore because I'm not stocking them, but there are some that I have seen that I do like. So, and I have actually bought from as well. Now, Sustainable Equitation is a company. They used to sell, I'm pretty sure they don't sell them anymore, but they have a very simple bitless bridle that they used to sell and that I've bought and that I liked. It has rubber on the back of the noseband, so it's not going to slip and slide around, and it's actually pretty comfortable as well. But I don't think they're stocking them anymore, but I feel like if enough people email them, they might restock them, because I'm not sure the reason why they stopped selling them. But they were really good, and I used to refer a lot of people to them. So that's Sustainable Equitation. Rebalance Equestrian. Oh my gosh. This little business that does beautiful handmade leather work, I absolutely love, and I have ordered a cavesson off of them before for in-hand work. I haven't actually ridden in that cavesson bitless, but you can ride in cavesson's bitless as well. But they basically do custom bridles, cavessons, halters, etc., whatever you want. So if you're super fussy like me, you can just have a look at their page and contact them and let them know exactly what you want, what colors, what brassware, what mechanism, etc., and they'll make it for you according to your horse's measurements. So absolutely love that. So if you have a specific style of bitless bridle that you like or you want, then you can get them to make it as per your request. Yes, they're really expensive, but totally worth it in my opinion if you are a bit quirky like me and like things a specific way. The next one that I really like, and a friend / student of mine, Beck, bought one from the Bit Bank, paradoxically. They sell a beautiful bitless bridle called Bridle to Fit, and it's more expensive, but it is probably the closest one that I've found to the one that I had made myself. It looks like a simple side pull mechanism. Sometimes they have sales on at the Bit Bank as well, so I really like that one too. The other one is, there's one called Light Rider, and a friend of mine, Linda, she rides in these and is an advocate for these, and I have another student who rides in them as well, and and they look good. I feel like they have a little bit of a mechanism under the chin area, so I think that's why I didn't choose to ride in those initially. But I know some people take that part off and just attach to the rings anyway, so you could do that yourself. And then the other one that I like is the Dressage Naturally one, so the one that Karen Rolfe has designed, but it doesn't look like a traditional normal, quote unquote, normal English bridle, which is what I personally like. It looks more of like a halter style without a brow band. So, but the mechanism is just like a side pull, and the way she's designed it, some bitless bridles, when you apply pressure to the side, they can sort of rotate and the leather can actually get very close to their eye or even over their eye, which I don't like. But these ones, they don't do that because of this, where Karen has designed the rings to be. So that's another one to look at as well. So there's many options, but just like saddles, there's no perfect saddle, there's no perfect bridle, there's no perfect arena surface, there's no perfect horse, there's no perfect rider, but we're always searching for like, what is the perfect piece of equipment? Find one that you and your horse likes the most and go with that. One question I had is, have you found any issues with skin rubbing or irritation? Now, in general, no, I haven't, but I think this also comes down to how you're riding with the bitless bridle. I will say though, I did do a week-long horsemanship camp years ago now, and it was summer, so my horse had a really short coat, and I was using a rope halter, and I actually did notice some rubbing from the rope halter. I felt horrible, and the dressage diva in me and also the horse lover in me just wanted to get some sheepskin and wrap that rope halter up in sheepskin, which would have looked quite ridiculous. But I honestly just think it was the length of time she just had the rope halter on for, because it's not like we were doing anything like aggressive with the rope halter to cause that rubbing. I just think she had a really short coat, sensitive skin, and wore the rope halter for such a long time that it was just, and she's got prominent, like, those cheekbones on the side of their face, they sort of stick out a little bit, and yeah, the rope halter perhaps wasn't the exact right size, didn't fit her perfectly, because she's got a very slight Roman nose as well, so that did actually cause some rubbing, which I felt awful about. But since then, I have not had any issues with rope halters rubbing. I have not had any issues with bitless bridles rubbing, but it certainly would cause some irritation if you were having like constant heavy aids on the noseband, which you want to avoid anyway. But I haven't had any issues with rubbing. But don't you think it's interesting that people don't really ask this question when it comes to bits? I mean, perhaps they do, but it's like kind of out of sight, out of mind. When the bit is in the mouth, we can't see any rubbing happening, but there would be some discomfort on the tongue and jaw, depending on how the horse is ridden, of course. I think because bitless bridles, it's such an external thing that we would notice the rubbing straight away, we would see it. But do we check our horses' mouths after every ride? Well, I don't, but I think I'm riding in a way where it's very unlikely that they're going to have any kind of irritation in the mouth from the bit. But yeah, don't you think that's interesting? So in general, no, I haven't had any rubbing from bitless bridles. So I don't think you'll run into any issues. You probably will run into issues if the bridle doesn't fit correctly, or you're using it for an excessively long period of time, or if you're using the bridle with heavy and constant pressure. And that is why when I like to ride with contact or shorter reins with a bitless bridle, I want it to be a soft padded noseband rather than a rope halter. You still can ride with contact with a rope halter, but I just don't think it's as comfortable as a bitless bridle with a padded noseband. So that would be my recommendation if you're wanting to ride with shorter reins or contact with a bitless bridle, is just to make sure that the noseband is padded. Now, in terms of the correct fit for a bitless bridle, pretty much you just want to make sure that the brow band isn't too tight, just like you would in a normal bridle. And you want to make sure that the noseband isn't too tight, hopefully, just like you would in a normal bridle. So you want to make sure that you can fit, well, the 2-finger rule, which is 2 fingers underneath the front of the noseband. You should be able to fit 2 fingers through. But for me, it's more like, can my horse graze? Can my horse yawn? Can my horse lick and chew and like really move their mouth around without the noseband interfering? I know that there are some people that ride bitless with a tight noseband, and perhaps that is to keep a bit more of a consistency with the horse's head, although I haven't found I've needed that when riding with contact bitless. I just like to have a loose noseband. I just think it's more comfortable for the horse, especially when you're starting out. You need that more on-off pressure as a cue, and I feel like it's more obvious with a looser noseband. You want the noseband to sit roughly 2 fingers below that little cheekbone that sticks out on the side. So you don't want it too low that it's putting pressure on the nose cartilage, because it can cause damage, and that would just be really uncomfortable. And you don't want it too high. I don't know the reason why we don't want it too high. I think it kind of looks funny, but also it just perhaps just doesn't have the same effect on when you're applying directional aids, because we want the horse to sort of follow their nose, I guess. And if the noseband's too high, it's not going to have that same kind of feel to it. And in terms of bitless fitting, you just want to make sure that you follow the guide of whatever bitless bridle you're choosing. You can always contact the manufacturer. You can send photos of your horse wearing their bitless bridle and ask, like, is this how you would recommend it fit? Do you have any recommendations? Should I lower the noseband, or whatever it might be? They can always guide you in the right direction. If anyone's bought any of my bitless bridles and you'd send me a photo of your horse wearing it, I would happily comment on whether it's right or whether you need to change something. Okay, I think I have covered all your bitless questions now. I love talking about bitless riding. I think it's just something I'm really passionate about, because I remember feeling like it would be hard to do, and like, where do you even start and what do you choose? And I would have loved to listen to an episode like this that would give me a lot of insight from someone who has done all the research, done all the trial and error, and found what works for different horses, and does it in a way that's light and comfortable and that the horse enjoys. So I hope that you're inspired by this episode to do some bitless riding, to start peppering in some preparation for bitless riding. And I will remind you that HFA is opening up in about a week's time on October 18th. So if you're curious about how to actually implement the fundamentals so you can set up your bitless riding for success, then definitely join me. I would love to have you head on over to amaliadempsey.com/HFA waitlist to get on the waitlist, to make sure that you get access to that early bird offer that's only going to be available for probably just a couple of days when it launches on October 18th. And then enrolment will close on the 1st of November. So I really hope to have you inside of HFA. Otherwise, I want to hear about your bitless riding. I want to hear how it's going. Send me a message on Instagram at Amalia_horses. Let me know if you love this episode. As always, if you leave a rating and review, it really does help this podcast reach more people, and it makes my day. I love hearing from you about what you got out of the episode. What are your breakthroughs? And hopefully I have inspired you in some way through today's podcast episode. Anyway, that's all for today. Everything bitless. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Horsemanship Breakthroughs podcast. Make sure you hit the follow button so you get notified every time a new episode is released. And if you've learned even just one small thing from today's show, I would really appreciate if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts, or screenshot this episode and share it on social media. You can connect with me on Instagram at Amalia_horses, or my website amaliadempsey.com, where you can find free resources to help you on your horsemanship journey. That's all for today. Thanks for being here. Remember to train with kindness and ride with excellence, and I'll see you in the next